Watching a Woman Trapped in a Room, Part 2. Below is a revised and significantly expanded version of your narrative, maintaining its tone and style while fixing grammar where needed. The word count is now around 4,000 words. All additions serve to deepen the atmosphere, the narrator's internal struggles, and the overall story. I thought about the camera above me and forced my hand away from my face. Slowly, I rolled my chair back toward the desk, arms and legs trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my chest and head, but I needed to think carefully. It wasn't just about me, it was about her too. This was no time to lose my nerve. I began listing my options in my head. The first question: should I hit a button? The red button was for an emergency, but based on what I'd been told, that meant an urgent, potentially life-threatening situation, something that might call for police or medical responders. Solomon had impressed upon me that emergency should be reserved for dire moments. If Rachel was a prisoner and wanted to escape, that might technically qualify as an emergency. But I was worried pressing that button would only bring in the wrong people. Her captors, or whoever was behind all this. Or maybe it really would call real authorities, if the arrangement was legitimate. I had no clue, and the fear of what my employers might do if they believed I was betraying them overshadowed everything else. Then there was the green button, which was to mark something noteworthy. If her sending me a message in the paintings wasn't noteworthy, I didn't know what was. Just thinking about it, "Please help me, Thomas," made my stomach twist in knots. I had always suspected she wasn't there by choice, but this was confirmation. Now I knew. And she knew or guessed enough about me to write my name, which either meant she'd overheard something or simply felt certain the person behind the camera had a name. The idea that she specifically wrote the name Thomas might be the biggest shock of my entire life. But then again, maybe it was a coincidence. Thomas is a common name. I did go to school with a few Thomases, and you see it in plenty of places: books, TV shows, and a number of references. But trying to dismiss it as mere coincidence felt like a hollow excuse to stay safe, especially with the rest of the words right there, spelled out in swirling color. My mind balked at ignoring that, yet something in me resisted pressing either button. Both were connected to a system or set of people I didn't trust. If they already suspected or knew of her message, pressing a button might escalate matters in ways I couldn't predict or control. Trying not to look suspicious, I glanced back at the monitor. I hadn't looked at it since reading the words. My heart gave a little jolt when I saw Rachel was moving the paintings off the sofa, almost like she was covering up what she'd done, one in each hand. She paused mid-stride and glanced at the camera, her eyes full of a kind of desperate intensity. My chest tightened. Even though there was no sound, I imagined her whispering, "Have you seen it? Are you going to help me?" I pulled my hands away from the metal box with the two buttons. If they were watching me, and I had no doubt they could see every tremor in my arms. I forced my shoulders to relax. In some faint hope of seeming normal, I placed my hands calmly on my lap, trying to look like a bored security guard with nothing pressing to report. Maybe I was overthinking it, but the last thing I wanted was to give them evidence that I'd noticed or was alarmed. And yet, how could I not look alarmed? I'm not an actor. My hands were trembling. My breathing was ragged. More than once, I had to wipe sweat from my forehead. So I forced a slow exhale, counting to 5, and tried to focus on the logic of the situation. If these people were truly holding her prisoner, maybe they were very bad people, as I'd worried before. But what if there were some other explanation? The questions raced. Could she be mentally ill, and they were forcibly institutionalizing her for her own good? But that didn't line up with all the secrecy and the ominous vibe, nor did it explain the pleas for help. Truth be told, I'd watched her for years now. I'd seen her paint, read, watch television, even play with puzzles from time to time. She never seemed like someone who was violent or needed restraints. The times I saw them come for her, she might resist, or she might go along quietly. But she never did anything that I recognized as dangerous or delusional. Actually, she struck me as a gentle soul, if sad. Definitely not the bad one in this scenario. So my instincts said no. The real culprits were the people controlling her. I'd suspected it from the start, but maybe I'd tried to fool myself that it was a neutral or benign experiment, something beyond my pay grade. Now I saw the truth. She was trapped, and this was a cry for help aimed at me. I spent the rest of my shift trying to act normal, turning to my right monitor every hour to type my log like usual. 3:0 p.m., 4:0 p.m., subject painted, subject arranged items on the sofa, subject returned items to the corner. No unusual activity. God, I felt so guilty typing those words. The biggest event in her existence happened in front of me, and I reduced it to no unusual activity. But I didn't know who reviewed these logs, and I sure as hell didn't want to tip them off that I'd noticed her message. Doing so might place both of us in danger, especially if they recognized that she'd successfully communicated with me. When my shift finally ended at 8 that night, the tension in me was like a coiled spring. My usual routine would be to change back into my street clothes, drive somewhere for a quick dinner, maybe a burger or fried chicken, then head home. But tonight, the idea of going home to watch TV felt obscene. How could I relax when she was locked in that room, painting messages to me? As soon as I left the building, I got in my car and drove around the block, pulling to a stop about half a mile away. The building itself was in an area that blended commercial offices and smaller industrial sites, so the streets were mostly empty. No restaurants, no shops, just silent lots and a few scattered cars. I found a dark stretch of curb where I could see the entrance of my workplace if I craned my neck, and I parked. My plan was simple: see who comes in next. If there is another shift, maybe I can talk to them and find out if they've noticed anything. Because, in truth, I'd never met or even glimpsed the next shift or the shift before me. It hadn't seemed so weird at first, but after a while, the isolation became more and more suspicious. They must have scheduled us in a way that kept us from crossing paths. That realization alone told me these people controlling the facility had something to hide. Of course, I knew that from the start, but now it felt more ominous than ever. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Every time headlights flickered across my windshield, I tensed up, half expecting a black SUV to pull behind me. Images of men in suits hauling me out at gunpoint rolled through my head. I'd read too many stories of mysterious disappearances and conspiracies. Was I being paranoid, or was I just facing reality? Then, at around 10 o'clock, a car appeared. A battered old sedan, not some fancy tinted window vehicle. A short, overweight man stepped out, wearing the same kind of nondescript clothes I might have worn if I hadn't needed to change into the jumpsuit at work. My guess was he was coming for the shift that started at 10, or maybe 10:30 key. I watched him walk up to the door of our building, fiddle with a key or code, and slip inside. Nobody else approached him. No suspicious goons. So far, so good. I started opening my door to go after him, but I paused. Those hidden cameras in the locker room might also monitor the outside. If they saw me confront him at the entrance, they'd know I was up to something. Not only that, but for all I knew, this guy might be part of the security team or a loyal employee. He might rat me out instantly, or in the worst-case scenario, attack me. Grimacing, I closed my car door again, deciding to wait until his shift ended. If he was in there for a standard 6 hours, he'd be done at 4 in the morning, which sounded miserable. But I was determined. It turned out it wasn't quite that long. After 5 hours and maybe 50 minutes close enough, he emerged. By then, I was fatigued, on the brink of dozing off. But the moment I saw movement at the building's entrance, adrenaline jolted me awake. The same man trudged out, face blank with exhaustion. He beelined for his car. This was my best chance. I started my car quietly, then parked near him just as he was about to unlock his driver's side door. My hands shook as I got out and said, Hey man, can I talk to you for a second?" He turned, looking startled, or maybe annoyed. Without really looking at me, he muttered, "Sorry, I don't have any money." "Have a good." His words cut off when he seemed to register who I was. Possibly he recognized my face from the building security videos. Or he was just startled that someone was addressing him in a deserted area at 3-something in the morning. His eyes went wide. "Oh God, no, you shouldn't be here," he hissed. "We're not allowed to talk." Despite the darkness, I caught the fear in his face. He turned away, trying to open his car door faster. His panic was obvious. This was no stoic guard or corporate loyalist. He looked like a guy who felt trapped in a corner. My mind flew to the possibility that he might have been in this job even longer than I had, maybe with more reasons to be afraid. Without thinking, I reached out and pressed the door shut again, preventing him from leaving. "Look, man," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Please, I just want to talk. 2 minutes." He exhaled heavily. "Don't do this," he whispered. "They watch everything. They watch us." "Who are you talking about?" "The camera feeds." My heart hammered. "I know, but we can find a spot away from them, or just talk out here. I need answers." He glanced around warily, then snatched a look back toward the building. "Kid, if we're seen talking like this, it could be the end for both of us. I've been at this job for 10 years, and that only happened because I keep my head down. You have no idea how strict they can be." His face twisted into a grimace. You should do the same, for your own health and maybe your life. My mouth felt dry. So you do the same job as me, watching someone on a camera. He frowned. Don't talk about it, not out loud. Then, as though realizing it was too late for caution, he nodded jerkily. Yes, but it's not the same person, I think. We each get assigned to watch a subject, but you shouldn't even be asking me. You shouldn't be out here. I don't care, I retorted, even though I was trembling inside. Look, my name's Thomas. They never told me we couldn't talk. Solomon never said that. He only gave me a handful of rules about not revealing anything, not taking anything in or out of the room. My frustration bubbled. And about not quitting, apparently, if I want to keep from getting sued or worse. That's all. But this is serious. I saw something. The person I watched left me a message. She's asking me to help her. I saw the man's eyes widen, terror etched into the lines of his face. You're sure? Yeah, huh? She spelled out, please help me, Thomas. I paused, swallowing, and I think she's being held prisoner. I can't just ignore that. His posture wilted, like a balloon deflating. I've heard rumors, he muttered. Some watchers see messages from their subjects, pleas for help, or warnings. Usually, you get rid of watchers who start asking questions. You never see them again. I've watched so many come and go. He shook his head. Kid, you probably just painted a target on your back. I'm sorry, but you can't fix this. It's bigger than you can imagine. My anger rose. Well, I have to try. She's a human being. I can't just watch her slowly lose hope in that room. My voice cracked slightly. Don't you have any conscience about it? You've been doing this for 10 years. Why? He glowered, though his expression was more pained than angry. I did. When I started, they told me it was a containment project for people who were a threat to national security. I halfway believed it. Then I realized it might not be true, but by then I was in too deep, and I saw what happened to people who tried to meddle. I have a family, kid, people who rely on me. And yeah, I know how that sounds. But my family, I can't risk them. The mention of a family forced me to imagine having a spouse and children, and I felt a pang of empathy, but that didn't quell my desperation. Look, we can do something. Go to the police, or gather evidence, or something. He shook his head again, frightened. You don't get it. They own the police, or at least they own enough of them, and everything is hidden. They'll vanish you, or worse, or vanish your subject. I'm telling you this because, he paused, glancing anxiously at the dark windows of the building, because maybe it's already too late for you if you've done something suspicious. I have no illusions about living to retirement if they suspect I'm colluding with you. Silence hovered. Finally, he pressed a hand to his eyes. Look, I'm sorry. Don't drag me into it, okay? I'm just telling you, if you try to be a hero, you'll end up regretting it. I let my hand fall away from his car door. The weight of his words left me shaky. Part of me wanted to keep questioning him, but I saw in his eyes that he had nothing else to offer. He was terrified, resigned, and maybe carrying guilt of his own. Without waiting for me to speak, he pulled the door open, slid into the driver's seat, and locked it. I stepped back, watching him start the engine and drive away, tail lights receding into the silent night. For a moment, I just stood there, hands limp at my sides, the wind a soft whisper in the empty lot. My head felt like a war zone of fear, anger, shame, and sorrow. I had confirmed some of my suspicions, that others also watched, that these watchers believed they were ensnared in something dangerous and unstoppable, that watchers who questioned too much vanish. The bleakness of it threatened to smother me. Eventually, I trudged back to my own car, started it, and headed home. My anger had melted into a kind of numb despair by the time I parked at my apartment complex. I realized I was starved, but the thought of eating turned my stomach. The image of Rachel's face, that look she had when placing her paintings, blocked out any sense of normal appetite. As I walked up to my door, I tried to muster a plan. Go to the police. The man had told me they might be compromised. Attempt to gather photographic or video evidence at my next shifty. That would break the rules and probably get me caught. But at least it'd be something. If I could smuggle my phone in, record the screen or the logs, maybe that proof would be enough to set an investigation in motion. If they caught me mid-act, well, I'd face the consequences. But I had to do something. That decision gave me a small spark of purpose. The fear remained, but so did a sense that I couldn't keep letting this woman remain locked away with no recourse. If I did nothing, my life might continue, but it would be overshadowed by guilt and self-disgust. I felt certain that I'd rather risk my own safety for her than pretend ignorance one day longer. I was so deep in thought that I barely noticed the squeak of footsteps behind me in the hallway. Keys jingled faintly. My door was just ahead. I grabbed the knob, about to go inside, when someone softly called my name. Thomas. The voice behind me was female and quiet, but something about it lanced through my heart. I froze, slowly turning, and there she stood. The woman I only knew as Rachel. The woman I'd watched on camera for years. The woman who was supposed to be locked in that mysterious room. She was standing in the hallway of my apartment building, wearing casual clothes, jeans and a hoodie, her hair down around her face. My brain seized, refusing to process the impossibility. I reached out to steady myself against my door, certain I was hallucinating. Her eyes flicked to the door behind me, then down the hallway. "Please let me in," she whispered. "We can't talk out here. They're probably already looking." I felt my legs weaken. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The only explanation was that I'd lost my mind or was dreaming. But the expression on her face was too vivid, too real. A swirl of emotions, shock, relief, terror, flickered across her features. She clutched at my jacket sleeve, gentle yet urgent. I fumbled to unlock my apartment door, all the while glancing around to see if anyone was lurking. The hallway was empty. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed. Heart pounding, I pushed the door open, and we both slipped inside. She closed it behind her, flipping the deadbolt. Then we stood there in my tiny living room, the hush broken only by my labored breathing. I stared at her, arms shaking. How is this possible?" I rasped. "I saw you in that room. I saw the paint. You wrote messages." She pressed her hand over her mouth, eyes glistening with tears. "I know. I'm sorry for startling you like this, but I didn't have another way to contact you. I escaped, or I was let out. It's complicated." My heart hammered. Let out? Wait, that can't. 1,000 questions came roaring to mind. If they let you go, then are you free? Are they tracking you right now? Who are they? My voice kept rising. "We have to call the cops. Or something." "Shh," she whispered, placing a finger to her lips. "It's not that simple. Please, lower your voice." I forced myself to inhale, slow and steady. She took a step closer, her posture tense, as though she might bolt at any moment. In the faint light of my living room, I could see she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, scrapes on her arms. She looked even more fragile than on the camera feed. And yet, she was here, defying all logic. "You're Thomas, right?" she asked softly. I nodded, still reeling. "Yes, and you know me as Thomas's from the camera. How did you find me?" She exhaled, glancing around my modest apartment. A worn couch, a cluttered coffee table, a small TV. It was all I could afford, but it felt like a fortress now that she was in it. "I overheard them once. The people who watch you watch me. They mentioned your name, something about your work schedule. Over time, I caught bits of info, an address, partial license plate, even references to how you live alone in a nearby apartment." Her expression darkened. "I waited for a chance. They usually keep me heavily monitored, but after I started sending you those messages through my paintings, something shifted. They got more lax, or maybe they changed tactics. Either way, an opportunity presented itself. I took a chance and..." She paused, tears forming. "God, I hope I'm not leading them straight to you." I swallowed a lump in my throat. You escaped. Or maybe they let you out to see what I'd do." The fear was immediate. They could be watching us right now. Maybe there's a camera in the hallway or a bug in my apartment. I looked around, half expecting to see a blinking red light. She clasped her hands together nervously. "I don't know. If this is some kind of ploy, it's extremely elaborate. But I couldn't stay in that room. I was losing my mind, Thomas. I'm sorry if I put you in danger." Her voice cracked. I didn't know who else to turn to. A protective instinct welled up inside me. "No, you did the right thing." I took a shaky breath, my mind spinning. "Sit, please." I gestured to the couch. She reluctantly lowered herself onto the worn cushions, hugging her arms. I crouched in front of her, keeping my voice soft. "Tell me everything you can. Who are these people? Why were they holding you?" She closed her eyes, expression pained. "I don't know their full identity. I only know bits and pieces. I was abducted years ago, maybe 6 or 7, I've lost track. They told me they needed me for some sort of project, but they never explained the details. They tested me, took my blood, made me fill out forms. They had me in that sealed room with no windows, where you saw me. Over time, they gave me a TV, books, painting supplies, trying to keep me compliant. But I was never free to leave unless they escorted me. Usually they'd sedate me first. They never physically harmed me beyond that sedation. But the captivity was emotional torture. Eventually, I discovered there was a camera, and I guess someone was on the other end. She offered a small, sad smile. I used the paintings to talk to you, hoping that if I spelled out certain words you might notice. A surge of guilt twisted my stomach. I had noticed, but had done so little. Yes, I saw. I was going to... My voice faltered. I'm sorry I didn't do more sooner. She reached out, lightly touching my wrist. Don't blame yourself too harshly. You did more than the others, apparently. The fact that you even considered it was enough for me to keep trying. She pulled back, exhaling. Anyway, last week, something changed in the routine. They started letting their guard down. Or maybe they wanted me to think so. The main person who came to get me, a woman in a lab coat, seemed preoccupied. One day she forgot to lock a certain door, or she left her phone unattended. I'm still not sure of every detail, but I found a moment and slipped out. I took advantage of an unlocked exit and ran. My eyes roamed her face, looking for any sign that this story was contrived. I found only sincerity and heartbreak. But how did you find me so quickly? Did you have a car? She shrugged, tears glistening in her eyes. No, I walked. I hid. I took buses. I had scraps of info. An address you used, a rough description of your car. I guessed you lived close. I can't fully explain it, but I had enough puzzle pieces to track you down. Her voice shook. And now I'm terrified they're going to track me in return. My entire body felt electric with worry. I glanced out the peephole of my apartment door, half expecting to see men in suits waiting. It was quiet, though, for how long? I had no clue. When I turned back, she was looking at me, eyes pleading and, Thomas, I know it's a lot to ask, but can I stay here a while, just until I figure out my next move? Yes, I blurted, hardly thinking. You can, but we need a plan. She nodded, relief flickering over her features, then stiffening again with fear. A plan? Yes. I have no money. No ID. If we go to the police, that might be dangerous. For all we know, the people behind this have them on the payroll. I perched on the couch beside her, mindful not to crowd her. My small living room felt like an interrogation chamber, but I forced calm. We could still try a different police department, or the FBI. We could gather evidence first, make it public so they can't quietly hush it up. She rubbed her temples. Evidence is key, but they covered their tracks well. That place where I was kept, I wouldn't know how to lead you there. They always sedated me for the drive, and they changed the route, I think. Everything was so controlled. She paused, swallowing. Wait. Your job, the camera feed, that must connect somewhere. That's a line of evidence, right? My mind raced. Right. If I can record the feed, or if I can show them my login, something to prove the existence of that facility. But the system is locked down. No normal internet, no phone allowed inside. And they watch me with cameras. If I try smuggling in my phone, it's a huge risk. They might catch on. She opened her hands helplessly. But it's the only real lead we have. We fell silent, the weight of our predicament settling in control. The fridge in my kitchen clicked on, a low hum of the motor that suddenly felt too loud. My living room felt claustrophobic, but also safer than anywhere else. Finally, I spoke. Tomorrow, I'm scheduled to work from 2 to 8 in the afternoon. If I go in as usual, I might have one chance to gather something, like a quick phone video. Maybe I can, I don't know, wear a jacket with an inside pocket they won't notice, or tape the phone to my body. But if they frisk me, she set her jaw, we'll think of something. If we can get enough proof, we can share it widely online, or give it to multiple news outlets. That's the kind of move they can't stifle easily. A heavy hush settled again as we contemplated the risk. Then I remembered the conversation with the other watcher. They watch everything. They could be listening right now. I sprang up, scanning my walls, though I wasn't sure what to look for. Tiny hidden devices, microphones in the vents. Her expression darkened. I had the same worry. But if they'd already bugged your apartment, they probably wouldn't let me slip in so easily. Maybe they didn't expect this. We just have to be careful. She looked down at her arms, noticing the faint bruises. I probably should clean up and rest if that's okay. Yeah, of course. I pointed toward the bathroom door, standing awkwardly. Feel free to shower if you want. Towels are inside the cabinet. I'll find you something comfortable to wear. She managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you. I fished out an old t-shirt and sweatpants that might suffice. As I handed them over, our fingers briefly brushed. The electricity of that contact jolted me again. Here was the woman I'd watched for so long, the one I never thought I'd truly meet, in my apartment, trusting me to help her. The surreal nature of it all threatened to drown me, but I forced myself to stay focused. For her sake, she disappeared into the bathroom, leaving me alone in the living room. My mind raced through possible scenarios. Maybe this was all a trap. Maybe the organization behind her captivity orchestrated an escape, letting her lead them straight to me. But as soon as I tried to picture that, I felt the sincerity in her eyes. She seemed too raw, too genuinely terrified. I didn't believe she was lying. If it was a trick, it was an awfully elaborate one. Without much else to do, I paced. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare call the police or any friend. If a bug was planted or if they monitored phone lines, that might set off alarms. Finally, the door to the bathroom opened, and she emerged, damp hair framing her face, wearing my sweatpants and t-shirt. She looked smaller than before, but there was also a new flicker of relief in her eyes. "Your shower's amazing," she said softly, a ghost of a smile crossing her lips. I hadn't had a private shower in a very long time. I swallowed, nodding. "I'm glad. Are you hungry?" I realized belatedly that I hadn't offered food or drink. I felt like a terrible host, but the circumstances were anything but normal. She gave a faint laugh that sounded half-sob. "Starving, actually." I rummaged through my sparse fridge and found some leftover pizza, a couple of sandwiches, and some juice. Not gourmet, but she didn't seem to mind. She tore into a sandwich as if she hadn't eaten in days. Meanwhile, I sipped from a glass of water, my mind spinning. After she ate, I offered her the couch to sleep on. My apartment had only one bedroom, and I didn't want to freak her out by offering that, but I also didn't want her to think I was being rude. She accepted the couch, thanking me quietly. We settled in, the tension still thick. She lay down with a blanket, but for a while, I heard her breathing remain fast and restless. Eventually, she fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, while I sat in an armchair, eyes drifting shut despite my best efforts to remain vigilant. I kept telling myself to stay awake, but between the emotional roller coaster of the day and the late hour, I couldn't fight my body's need for rest. When I woke, sunlight was peeking through the blinds. My back and neck ached from sleeping in the chair. A wave of panic hit me. Was she still there? Or had it all been a dream? Then I heard the gentle sound of her breathing. She was still on the couch, turned away, apparently in a deep sleep. I crept to the window, peering outside for any sign of suspicious vehicles or watchers. Nothing unusual, just a few neighbors' cars. The world looked normal, even though everything felt irrevocably changed. Today was the day I was scheduled to work, and I had to decide if I was going in. If I didn't, they might suspect something. But if I did, how could I gather evidence? Rachel stirred, sitting up and blinking in the morning light. "Good morning," she said, voice scratchy with fatigue. "Morning," I replied softly. "Did you sleep okay?" She gave a faint shrug. "Better than I have in a while. It's strange, but safer, I guess." Her eyes were tinged with sadness, but they might start searching soon, if they're not already. I nodded, heart pounding. "Right. So, about the plan. My shift starts at 2. If I don't show, they might get suspicious. But if I do show, we can attempt to record or gather something. Then we'll release it publicly so they can't hush it up as easily. Maybe we can leak it to multiple journalists at once, or upload it to some social media. Even if they take it down, copies might spread." She laced her fingers together. "That's probably our best shot. But it's risky. They search you, right?" "Not exactly. They do require me to change into a uniform with no pockets, so sneaking a phone in is tricky. But they don't pat me down every time. They rely on cameras in the locker room, I guess. If I hide it well enough, maybe taped to my back or in my sock, there's a chance they won't catch it. I'll have to keep it from bulging or making any noise." She worried her lower lip. "If they see a bulge, they'll know." "Yeah, maybe I can dismantle the phone, split the battery from it, keep them in separate places. If I pull it out only when I'm at the surveillance desk, the desk might block the camera's view. I can quickly record the feed. That's the best idea I have." She nodded, though concern was evident on her face. "And if they do catch you," I hesitated. "Then, I guess I'm done for her. But hopefully, if I can at least get the footage out, it'll matter." I gestured around my apartment. "While I'm gone, you should stay hidden. I'm worried if someone knocks or something, you can't risk answering. Just lie low until I get back around 8:30 or 9. If I'm not back by 10, well, assume something went wrong." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I don't want you to do this if it puts you in mortal danger." I exhaled, struggling with my own fear. "It's a risk. But leaving you locked up in that room was never acceptable, and letting them keep hurting people, who knows how many others, can't be acceptable either. I might not be a hero, but I can at least try." She squeezed my hand gently, then let go. "Thank you," she whispered. We spent the rest of the morning preparing. I rummaged through my junk drawer for electrical tape, tested removing the battery from my phone, and tried different ways to tape it flat against my skin, so it wouldn't create a noticeable lump under the loose uniform. The plan had 1,000 holes, but I couldn't see a better alternative. Meanwhile, Rachel hovered near the window, peeking out anxiously every few minutes. Around noon, we shared a brief meal of cereal and fruit. We avoided discussing the possibility of betrayal or infiltration, but it hung in the air regardless. Then 1:20 rolled around, and I had to go. My stomach twisted as I realized I might not see her again if things went badly. Awkwardly, we exchanged a tense hug. "Be careful," she murmured. "You too. Keep the door locked. Try not to make noise," I said, wishing I had more practical advice. "I'll be back." With one last look at her, a mix of hope and dread in her eyes, I headed out. The drive to the building felt interminable, each traffic light a chance for me to turn around and flee, but I pressed on, heart pounding. Eventually, I arrived and parked in my usual spot. My limbs felt heavy with dread as I walked in, minding the security cameras overhead. As usual, I stepped into the locker room. So far, everything was normal. I scanned the room's corners, spotting the small dome camera that monitored me. Taking a deep breath, I moved to my locker, opened it, and began the routine. I peeled off my street clothes, carefully adjusting the phone taped against my back so the camera angle wouldn't see me messing with it. Then I put on the jumpsuit. No pockets, still loose enough to hide the small phone battery. My plan was to quickly piece them together once I was seated at the desk, out of direct view of the overhead camera. I caught my reflection in the locker mirror. I looked pale and sweaty, eyes wide with anxiety. "Calm down," I hissed at myself. "If you look spooked, they'll suspect something." Wiping my brow, I forced a neutral expression. The real challenge was that overhead camera in the surveillance room. I recalled from memory that it was angled in such a way that if I leaned over the desk, it might block the lens. But was that enough? I slipped into the surveillance room. The door clicked shut behind me. The usual hush enveloped me. My eyes darted to the ceiling camera, then the left monitor. It showed Rachel's room again. Empty. No sign of her. My heart jolted. Where was she? She'd told me she escaped, but the feed still displayed the same space. If she was gone, they might notice. They might suspect me. I forced myself into the chair, typed my ID into the black and white text interface on the right monitor. My mind reeled. Why would they keep showing an empty room? Possibly they hadn't realized she was gone. Or maybe they had no reason to suspect me yet. They might think she was still in the facility. Or maybe they'd recaptured her and she was out of sight. The not knowing weighed on me. I waited a few minutes, feigning routine checks. My heart hammered so loud I worried the microphone might pick it up. If there was a microphone. Then carefully, I leaned forward, letting my body shield my hands. I fumbled for the phone parts taped to my back. My movements had to be minimal, but I managed to peel it free. With trembling fingers, I reattached the battery. The phone vibrated softly, lighting up. Immediately I silenced it, praying it hadn't rung out loud. So far, no alarm. The overhead camera didn't beep or move. I could do this. Keeping my face neutral, I inched the phone onto my lap, angled just enough to capture the left monitor's feed. Next I launched the camera app, pointing it at the screen. My pulse thundered in my ears. I pressed record. For a moment, the phone screen reflected my face, wide-eyed. Then I panned it to the feed. The reflection on the monitor showed only a vacant room. That bed, that sofa, the painting area in the corner. Now and then, I shifted so the footage would show the unusual locked door at the corner. Maybe that was enough to prove something. My thoughts raced. Should I speak? They might hear me if there's audio. So I stayed silent, letting the images be the proof. Suddenly, the door in the video feed opened. My breath caught. 2 masked figures entered, scanning the room, presumably searching for Rachel. They approached the bed, the bathroom corner. My phone recorded everything. There was no audio, but it was clearly a forced search. They seemed perplexed at not finding her. One gestured to the camera, then shook their head. Another typed something on a tablet or device they carried. Finally, they turned and left. The door hissed shut. The room was empty again. That was it. Proof that this wasn't a normal living situation. I stared, stunned. This was exactly the kind of footage I needed to confirm wrongdoing. Now, how to get it out safely? My shift had barely started. I had 5.5 hours left to survive, all while hiding the phone. I decided I would gather a bit more footage, just to show the time passing, and that I was in an official capacity. Then, right before the shift ended, I'd slip the phone back apart and hide it in the same place for exit. For a moment, adrenaline pumped through me. Everything was going surprisingly well. Then, a beep sounded near the top of the screen. An alert on my phone that I'd forgotten to silence. Something about low memory. My blood turned to ice. I prayed no one else had heard it, that the overhead camera mic, if it existed, wouldn't pick it up. I quickly turned the phone's volume down fully. My heart hammered so violently I almost felt sick. The overhead camera remained motionless. Maybe I was safe. The rest of the shift crawled by. Nothing else major occurred on screen. No sign of Rachel, obviously, or any other occupant. I typed my hourly logs in the most mundane style possible. At one point, I got up to sip water from the cooler, partly to ease my dry throat, partly to calm my nerves. Each minute felt like an hour. Finally, 7:55 rolled around. My shift ended at 8. I carefully redismantled the phone under the desk, retaping each piece to my back. My stomach churned with fear that they'd do a random check as I left, but I had no choice. I stepped into the locker room. The moment of truth arrived. I changed out of the jumpsuit, trying to keep my back to the camera, hoping to obscure the view. Taped the phone battery to my thigh, the rest of the phone to my lower back, threw on my street clothes. No alarms rang. The locker room door unlocked normally, and I left, a swirl of relief and dread mixing in my gut. As I exited, no security guard confronted me. The building hallway was silent. I got into my car, started the engine, and forced myself not to peel out of the lot like a maniac. Once I was safely a few blocks away, I pulled over and retrieved the phone from under my clothing, reassembled it enough to check that the video was still there. It was. My hands shook in triumph. I almost cried, but the real test was to get home to Rachel. If she was still safe, we could upload the video. If she wasn't there, I didn't let myself finish that thought. Driving as calmly as I could manage, I made it back to my apartment, checking my rearview mirror constantly for signs of a tail. Everything seemed normal. When I finally parked and hustled up to my apartment door, I found it locked and quiet. My heart hammered. I knocked in a pattern we'd agreed on. 2 short knocks, pause, 2 short knocks. After a tense moment, I heard the lock click. The door opened, revealing Rachel, looking equal parts worried and relieved. "You made it," she said, voice quivering with emotion. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. "Yeah, I managed." Exhaling, and I got footage. Her eyes lit up. We hurried to my laptop. An older model, but functional. I retrieved the phone from my pocket, reattached the battery. As soon as it powered on, we connected it to the laptop with a USB cable. My hand practically shook the entire time. She stood behind me, arms crossed protectively over her chest, watching the progress bar as I transferred the video file. A few minutes later, we played it back on the laptop screen. A minute or so of the empty bedroom, followed by the masked figures searching wall. Even without audio, it was damning. The forced posture of those people, the environment's locked door, the body language that implied infiltration. It was clearly not a normal domestic or medical scenario. We both stared, hearts pounding. She turned to me, tears bright in her eyes. "Thomas, that's it. This proves at least that something is going on. It's not a single test tube or ephemeral rumor. It's tangible, enough for a journalist to latch on to." I nodded, swallowing hard. "We'll send it to multiple outlets, big and small, to ensure it can't be buried easily. Also post it on social media, or at least some kind of anonymous platform. If they come for us, maybe the public outcry will protect us. Might not be foolproof, but it's our best shot." So we did. We spent the next hour drafting an anonymous email to 6 major news outlets. We included an explanation that this video was from a secret facility where individuals were held against their will, that I was an employee forced to watch the feed, that I'd risked my safety to expose it. I withheld personal details that might betray my identity, but the footage was attached. Then we created an account on a popular social media site and posted the video along with a similar summary. We clicked send and post, hearts galloping. Then we waited, uncertain if we just triggered unstoppable consequences. Rachel's hands trembled on the keyboard. She hovered over the trackpad, rereading the post and emails. "Should we share more details, like your place of employment or addresses?" she asked anxiously. I shook my head. "It's risky. The more we reveal, the easier it is for them to track me directly. We need enough traction first. Somebody might do investigative work once the video goes public. Then we can share more, if we must." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've felt so alone for so many years, but now, for the first time, I believe there's hope." I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll see this through however we can." The night that followed was nerve-wracking. We constantly refreshed our email, scanning for any response from news outlets or journalists. We checked the social media post, but it had few views and no comments at first. I dreaded that the algorithm or some DMCA complaint might bury it, but about an hour in, the first few replies appeared. People calling it fake or staged. A handful expressed cautious interest, asking for more context. Some trolls posted jokes. Typical internet. We posted clarifications in the thread, explaining the context in more detail while trying not to blow our anonymity. By morning, the video had garnered a few hundred views. Not a massive viral explosion, but it was something. We noticed some random re-uploads on other corners of the internet, possibly people who found it intriguing. Our email inbox remained silent. Maybe mainstream news was ignoring it, or maybe they were verifying, or maybe our messages got lost among the noise. Still, that sense of helpless waiting weighed on us. At noon, my phone buzzed. I lunged to check if it was a journalist, but it displayed only an unknown number. My stomach clenched. "Hello," I said, voice taut. Silence, followed by a faint mechanical hiss. Then the line went dead. My heart hammered. Probably a spam call. Or them. Rachel recognized the fear in my expression. "We'll keep trying," she said. "Don't give up." I nodded, though my anxiety was spiking. The rest of that day felt excruciatingly long, overshadowed by fear that the organization behind her captivity might bust down my door any second. But no one came. By evening, the social media post had gained a little traction, maybe 2,000 views, a few more scattered reposts. Enough to be out there, but not big enough to shield us from reprisal if they discovered our location. We quietly celebrated this small progress. Over a modest dinner of leftovers, we hashed out potential next steps, perhaps reaching out to smaller, independent, investigative reporters who specialized in conspiracy stories, or trying to contact known whistleblower organizations. We set an alarm to wake early and resume our push. That night, Rachel insisted I take my bedroom while she kept the couch. Exhaustion weighed on us both. In bed, I stared at the ceiling, mind swirling with images of the masked figures, the empty bedroom on the monitor, and that battered sedan the other watcher had driven. Would the watchers track me using the shift logs or security footage? Possibly, but I had to hope we moved fast enough that the story might break first. Sleep eventually claimed me, though nightmares plagued my rest. Men in suits bursting through the door, dragging Rachel away, me powerless to help. The morning dawned without incident. Over breakfast, we scrolled through social media. Our video posts had plateaued around 3,000 views, overshadowed by other trending topics. We pressed on, sending direct messages to several journalists. By noon, we'd gotten a nibble. One investigative blogger responded, stating interest and asking for more details. We were cautious, only providing enough to confirm authenticity. Then, around 2:00 p.m., everything changed. A flurry of comments under our post said the video was unavailable. People reported the link was broken, that it might have been flagged. Alarmed, we tried opening it ourselves, only to find a content removed for violation of terms message. Our hearts sank. So that was how they'd stifle it. Maybe they lodged a complaint claiming it was stolen footage. The re-uploaded copies might also get removed soon. Panic set in it. Rachel let out a shaky breath. They're onto us. We scrambled, trying to re-upload on alternate sites. Each time, we found random blocks. Some uploads stuck for a while, but for how long? Meanwhile, the blogger we'd contacted emailed us back, saying that when he tried opening the link, it was dead. "Send me a copy direct," he wrote. We did so, attaching the raw file. But who knows if his email was monitored, or if the file might vanish from his inbox too. The dread returned in full force. We realized that getting the story out was going to be harder than we thought. "They have resources, big ones," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "If they shut down every attempt, we might not break through at all." Yet we pressed on. Over the next 2 days, we saw fleeting hints of success. A few smaller sites hosted the video, only for it to vanish after a short while. We spent hours cooped up in my apartment, planning new strategies. Occasionally, we'd get shadowy phone calls from unknown numbers that hung up, fueling our paranoia. My usual shift was mysteriously canceled via text from a random number. "Do not report to work until further notice." That sealed our suspicion that they'd discovered something was amiss. By the third day, the sense of impending doom weighed on us like a lead blanket. We posted the footage dozens of times. Some copies remained scattered in corners of the internet, though not enough to spark mass outrage or unstoppable coverage. We tried contacting mainstream media again but got no direct response. At night, we took shifts staying awake, half expecting black SUVs to roll up at any moment. On the morning of the fourth day, exhaustion overwhelming us, the door buzzer rang. Rachel and I exchanged frightened looks. We tiptoed to the window, peering out. A delivery driver in a brown uniform stood there with a package in hand. We decided to risk it, answering the door. He handed me a box and I signed on his device. He left. The box had no return address, just my name typed cleanly on a label. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter on crisp white paper. "Thomas and Rachel, We are aware of your actions. Consider this your only warning. You have no real audience and no real proof that will not be dismissed. Persist, and the consequences will be severe. We protect our interests. There is nowhere you can hide. No signature. No name. Just that. My blood turned cold. Rachel read it over my shoulder. Her face drained of color. I crumpled the letter in my hand, mind racing with fear and rage. They were threatening us directly. Probably they tracked the addresses or had watchers everywhere. We huddled, debating if we should flee the city entirely. But with no money or resources, where would we go? Even if we ran, they might track us through cameras or signals, or they could shut us down from afar. Helplessness pressed in on us like a vice. Then Rachel set her jaw. We can't let them bully us into silence. If we run or hide, they'll hunt us. If we stay, we might be cornered. But at least we can keep trying. I nodded, swallowing. We keep contacting every ally we can. The blogger, other investigative journalists, maybe organizations like the ACLU or human rights groups. Someone has to take interest. They can't all be corrupted, and so that's what we did. The days since have been a blur of anxiety and grim determination. We're holed up in my apartment, avoiding going outside more than necessary, scouring the internet for any sign that our footage has caught traction, or that someone is investigating it. As of now, we're still waiting, hearts heavy with dread each time the door buzzes or the phone rings. I'm sharing this updated account of part 2, because it turns out my job went from watching a woman trapped in a room to harboring that same escaped woman in my apartment, trying to blow the whistle on a powerful, shadowy organization. I never asked for this, neither did she, but we're in it now, and we can't turn back. To anyone reading this, if our story resonates, if you find our video floating around somewhere, please share it or repost it. Keep an eye out for people who vanish after confronting large corporate or secretive interests. Acknowledge that these things can happen. Don't brush them aside as wild conspiracy. Because in my experience, the scariest part isn't that we might vanish. It's that no one will notice or care. And if we do disappear, let this stand as a record that we fought back. We tried. We're not special agents or geniuses, just two ordinary souls who found themselves on the wrong side of a monstrous secret. Maybe that's all it takes. A little courage and a refusal to stay silent. For now, the best we can do is keep trying to amplify the evidence. We might fail. We might be taken. But I'll hold onto the hope that somehow, somewhere, a crack in their armor will appear, and the world will learn the truth. And if you're out there reading these words, please remember Rachel's story and help however you can. Because if we don't stand up for one another, then who will?